Welcome to the IVM Podcast Network.
China is building the One Belt, One Road project. Should India join?
Do our governments actually earn enough money to spend on all the things they want to?
Can you really call something a crime if there are no victims?
Why aren't we allowed to host this podcast? Hi.
We'll talk about all this and more on this episode of the Pragati podcast.
Hi, I'm your host Hamsini Hariharan.
And I'm Pavan Srinath.
And every fortnight on the Pragati podcast, we discuss politics, policy and economics.
In the first half of the show, Hamsini and I exchanged notes on what we've been reading and obsessing over the past 2 weeks.
In the second half, Pavan and I sit down and talk about victimless crimes with Devanshu Datta, who joins us all the way from this small little town in the heart of India called New Delhi. You may have heard of it. So Pavan, tell me, what have you been reading this week?
Well, I've been reading up on public finance.
Wow.
Yeah, a dry subject, but important. So this is about how governments think about raising taxes, raising revenues, and then spending it on us. So Amit Verma had a nice piece in Hindu Business Line where he sort of starts from talking about how you would spend money on yourself and how well you would spend money on someone else. And what governments do is they take other people's money and then spend it on other people. Right?
Right.
So governments don't necessarily spend it on themselves. There are other problems that happen with governments thinking about government salaries and so on, but let's not go there.
So this is basically like me taking Amit's money and buying you a birthday gift with it. So I don't really care about either of you.
Yeah,
So
exactly, right? So
I would spend a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, you're assuming here that you don't care for anyone. But yeah, you don't necessarily extract the maximum value out of every rupee over there, which you would say if you're doing this for yourself. Nor would you be very, very concerned about optimizing the cost, not spending more than you need to. So this is a classic challenge. All governments deal with it. And so therefore you need elaborate structures and so on to ensure that money is spent well. And then those have their own politics and the game is endless. Having said all of this, taxes are important, governments do matter, but in general the principle is that governments should spend on things that societies and markets cannot manage to make or produce on their own. Okay. So for example, defense, infrastructure, public goods, maybe merit goods like health and education, places where governments can play a strong spending role, or sometimes they can play other roles. But that's how we should be thinking about spending. Anything that the market or society can manage to do well, government should get out of the way. Right. So basically we should ensure that the taxes are as low as possible.
You liar, Pavan. I pay so much tax that I don't have any money at the end of the month. The government should be lowering rates, right?
Well, so there are 2-3 ways to look at it. A lot of the taxes that you end up paying are actually as consumption taxes, right? Your VAT, service tax. What you actually pay as income tax is only one small part of it. But that's the thing that is most visible to all of us. So here we have two problems. One, if you look at the Indian economy as a whole, if say the Indian economy has about 100 rupees of value, then only about 16 rupees of that would come as tax. So all governments in India, all taxes together are about 16% of India's GDP. So that's not a lot. Developed countries have 25% of GDP as taxes. It can be higher. Of course, there are some countries which have completely nationalized the healthcare, right? So it makes sense that the governments are larger.
But is this just the union government?
No. I'm talking about all governments put together are just 16% of India's GDP.
Okay.
So on that count, India needs to improve its tax to GDP ratio. It should ensure that more of the economy at some point, in the right way, sort of pays some tax and goes on. Okay. So the problem in India is there are too many people who are getting away with not paying their fair share of taxes, and our money is being spent on a lot of stupid things as well. Right? So those are two problems. So you are paying a lot, but the real problem in India is it's so much of a hassle to pay your taxes. And, lots of things work in different ways. Say the corporate income tax might be very high, but eventually even a corporate income tax translates into a tax on the household, tax on your income. So that's the problem.
Okay, but why does all of this matter now?
Well, it matters now because this is the year of the GST. Yes. So what's happening over the next couple of months and this week? So you have in May 18th and 19th, you have a GST council that's being convened in Srinagar, Kashmir, where all kinds of other chaos is happening, but you're also deciding national policy. And they're deciding the rate and the structure of the goods and services tax. And this is big because governments have a lot of inertia. So after a lot of work, after a lot of things being moved, finally we've come to a stage where the goods and services tax will roll out across the entire country in July. And the rates and the slabs and the tariffs and other mechanisms should all be decided and finalized now. This is the last shot we get before it rolls out. Who knows what you can change after it rolls out? So what's happening is the goods and services tax that we have is far from perfect. The idea of it was that the economy is becoming more complex, that any service, any good that you produce in the market, something else has gone in. So if, say, somebody is making a computer, there's the hardware in it, there's the software in it, there's the internet access part of it. There are so many aspects.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you need to have a holistic taxation system which takes into account both things. And of course, as you know, some of these powers vested with the states, some of these taxation powers vested with the government of India, and so now all of it has been taken on by the government of India with this GST council where all states also have their representatives, right? So you have this complex mechanism for making decisions.
So what are they going to do in Srinagar apart from going boating on Dal Lake?
The big thing is a review of the tariffs. The current tariff system has its highest slab at 28%. So we don't know, first of all, it's not finalized as to which goods and services this 28% might apply to and whether it should be 28% at all. So our chief economic advisor recently had an op-ed in Indian Express where he argued that ideally we should get rid of the 28% and maybe make the 18% slab into the 20% slab. So overall government revenues might be the same, but we might avoid getting the tag of being a high GST zone. Okay. Now this is important because we are saying, look, taxation systems in India are terrible, they're archaic, convoluted, so we'll simplify it such that you have ease of doing business, foreign investors and capital can also come in, all of that. And if the new system is seen as a high taxation system, then obviously it's not achieving that particular goal. There are also all kinds of problems with, say, you're nice enough to pay your GST, but somebody you've bought some products from has not paid their GST properly. Then what do you pay for? What do you not pay for? What are you liable for? All this is up for grabs. Now, all of this is, none of this is new. Okay, even our income tax, services tax, all kinds of systems there. But it's important that we get these new systems right from the get-go. So we'll come to know soon whether the GST that rolls out is a little more reformed and a little more refined than what we have right now.
Okay, let's hope that happens.
So Hamsini, anything exciting that came your way and maybe outside the world of public finance?
Yeah, far away from what we're talking about. In China, they organized this forum, which has unfortunately been called the Belt and Road Forum, or BARF, on the 14th and 15th of May. So this is big because this is the first international forum which was centered specifically around the One Belt, One Road project. And there was this huge fuss created in India about whether or not we were going to attend this forum. And this became a big thing because Putin attended it, Erdogan attended it, representatives from Nepal and Sri Lanka and Kenya and countries all around the world, including the US, attended it.
So give me like a TLDR version of what is the One Belt, One Road project. And then we'll sort of come to what they were actually doing at this
Sure.
thing.
So the One Belt, One Road project was started in 2012. You might have also heard of it being called as the Silk Road project. So it's a very simple idea. It says that there are all these countries around the world that are still developing or are underdeveloped, and they don't have the money to finance their own infrastructure. So roads, bridges, ports, which are essential for them to grow their economy. So the government of China said, okay, we should all get together and go along the ancient trade routes, and let's build our connectivity along these trade routes. So it said that it would help these countries build these projects, whether their, infrastructure projects.
So basically, China is financing trade infrastructure in its neighborhood, in a sense.
Not only its neighborhood, it's stretching
Okay.
up all the way to London. I don't know if you read that the railway between London and Beijing has been flagged off recently.
All right. So all roads lead to Beijing,
Yes, essentially.
and all shipping lanes lead
Lead
to Beijing.
to Beijing? Well, not yet. But
All right. So this is the grand Chinese plan. So what was the key things that were getting decided at the meeting?
So the One Belt, One Road Forum is the first time that these countries are coming and talking about the projects that are going to be built, how they're going to be built, how they're going to be financed, and so on. It's also on a larger geopolitical level, right? There was a lot of talk about how it's indicative of a new world order, how this is going to be a new sort of multilateral institution that's going to be built. And several people from the US even said, this is China's answer to G20 and the World Economic Forum, which is something that's brought up every time. The idea that China is building parallel institutions. It may not be, but it's also indicative of a power, right? China is the central player in this. So it is building a new type of institutional infrastructure as well.
And they clearly have the money to do at least some of it.
Yeah, they do have the money to do it. So how it's being financed is mostly that they're lending these countries money. So the countries will buy it from them and at very low interest rates over long periods of time.
Okay.
So which is why they're favorable to these countries compared to, say, what Japan would build or what the US would build.
But they would come with Chinese strings attached.
Yes, so that's the major worry that a lot of countries have, right? Whenever you have a new power that is rising, you have these narratives of a dragon being drawn up, and no one is really sure about what these Chinese strings are, Pawan. I mean, does it mean that these are going to be considered as Chinese assets that are going to be protected, that needs Chinese military protection? Does it mean that if these countries can't pay back their loans, how will China then reclaim their money? So these are all questions that we have to think about, and particularly the fact that infrastructure is a capital investment, right? So it's going to be there for the long time. So that's a very worrying factor. And when you look at India particularly, our major problem has been the China-Pakistan economic corridor, particularly because we say that it infringes on our own sovereignty because we still have an unresolved border with Pakistan and part of this China-Pakistan economic corridor passes through it. We say, okay, that isn't fair because our border is still...
No, so that's a normative problem with... They're building it on sovereign Indian territory.
Yes.
But beyond that, the geopolitical angle is some form of an encirclement threat of India. Right?
Yeah, so there are varying views on encirclement. So first, this was called the string of pearls theory, where back in 2008, where everyone was going gaga about the fact that China was encircling India and that in case of a war, we're going to be cut off from all our points and so on. Now, it's extremely debatable if this is, an encirclement of India, but it doesn't rule it out because, at the end of the day, India has to be practical about whether or not its interests, its core national interests, are being harmed. So when a lot of people keep saying, India should join the OBOR because it offers it so much economic potential. Anyway, our infrastructure, particularly in areas like the Northeast, is really bad. So why don't we get help for this? That is one way to look at it. But
sure. Yeah, I would be uncomfortable with Chinese roads being built in Arunachal Pradesh. But yeah, I actually have no problem with Chinese investment coming in to build a road in Domlur or...
Neither do I. But my question is, what is the opportunity cost? I think Indian geopolitical thinkers, that's the main question that they are still trying to figure out. What gives, Because this can't be an altruistic investment.
Of course, it isn't altruistic, but so long as interests are aligned, then you're okay.
Yes.
Look, Bangalore's a growing part of the world economy. Various parts of India are integrated in the global economy, and so if there's better infrastructure than anyone can finance, then, you can do a bunch of things. And, the thing with strings is that they can always be pulled both ways, right?
Fair enough. You know what, Pawan? That's what I was thinking about. If you take CPEC, right? If you took it out of the equation.
Wait, what's CPEC?
The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor that passes through Kashmir. If you took that out of the equation, right? I mean, that infringes on our sovereignty.
Sure.
Fine, we have a normative position. Take that out of the equation. Then would we be averse to the OBOR? I'm not too sure. I think people would be fine about it. It's just this historical enmity that's weighing us down.
Right. Especially at a time when the US pivot towards Asia seems to be gone. Its flavor of 2015.
Yes, I mean, the US flavor of Asia has changed, right? I mean, at one point you had people declaring that this is America's Pacific century. It isn't, because you don't know how US foreign policy in this region is going to be.
And what Trump's going to do.
Basically. So India's primary position in staying outside the OBOR framework earlier, I think, was the fact that we could build sort of a framework of our own with Japan or US or countries that we're comfortable with. But with these countries' positions also changing, we don't know how that's going to affect us.
Fair enough. And in general, if good ports are built in the Indian region, Indian ships can use those ports as well.
Yes,
right?
They can.
So, Hamsini, India decided not to participate in the OBOR meetings this year. How should we think about this going forward?
See, going forward, we should be prepared to take a lonely stance if it's in direct contest with our national interests and we believe that it's going to infringe on our sovereignty. But it is going to be a very lonely stance, Pawan.
All right. So, Hamsini, on OBOR or something else, any recommendations for readings for our listeners? What would you bat for?
Actually, Pawan, there's an article by P. Stobden in The Wire on China's Buddhist globalization and how India is undermining its own Buddhist legacy. And it's a fascinating read for anyone who's interested in the region. And what about you, Pawan?
I would recommend Manish Sabarwal's piece from May 1st in the Indian Express titled 3 10-year plans. Manish has a very interesting idea about very wonkish outcomes that we can achieve in 10 years in land, labor and capital, which can transform many, many things in India and in the Indian economy and can be a good goal to aim for.
All right, that sounds good, Pawan. That's it for the first half of the Pragati podcast. When we come back, we're going to sit down with Devanshu Datta to talk about victimless crimes.
Hi, I'm May, and I'm a huge fan of the indie music scene in our country. A scene that's relatively underground, even though it sometimes speaks its head overground, but there's no shortage of talent, and I get the privilege of interviewing some of the most awesome musicians on my show. I've had the likes of Euphoria, Krish Kale, Hardcore, Randolph Correa. I've had singer-songwriters, folk singers, electronic music producers, playback singers, rappers, fusion artists, instrumentalists, classical musicians, and so on. Whether mainstream or not, these people have chosen to release their original music, and these are the people currently shaping the direction in which our music scene is heading. Join me on my show every Monday and tune in to discover the unique talent coming out of India today. You can catch Made in India on your favorite podcasting app or our very own IVM podcast app.
Welcome back to the Pragati podcast. We're your hosts, Hamsini Hariharan and Pawan Srinath. You were listening to The Filter, where Pawan and I discuss news, analysis and views from India and the world.
Joining us now in the second half of the show is Pragati columnist Devanshu Datta. Devanshu writes on everything from markets to religion to chess, and his pieces are always a delight to read. However, Devanshu has a dark side to him. He's also a gambler, an addict, and sells moonshine on the side. And he is here arguing that he shouldn't go to jail for any of it and demands that we find even one victim for any of his crimes before he is sent to jail. What the hell, Devanshu? Pranab Mukherjee batted for retrospective taxation and you're arguing for retrospective legalization?
It's the other way around, actually.
Okay.
Since you mentioned Pranab Mukherjee, I have walked out of a meeting with him.
Okay.
Walked into a government shop and bought ganja from right opposite the Congress office in Calcutta. In fact, the bus stop was known as Ganja Park. It was right around my house. And there was a government shop which used to legally sell grass. That's the dried flower of the marijuana plant. And
Okay.
it was legal when Pranab Babu was the finance minister under Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And it continued to be legal while Rajiv Gandhi was in charge until Rajiv took a large loan from the IMF and had his arms twisted to bring in a new act which delegalized marijuana, ganja. I would prefer to call it ganja.
So,
because
Devanshu, on marijuana
Indian
alone,
world.
there's been this move to legalize it across the world, right? In
Yes.
the last couple of decades. So here there are disparate crimes of various sorts, or things that are considered crimes today, from gambling to something like marijuana. In some places, even drinking alcohol is considered illegal. But is there something common to all of them, or are they all independent issues?
What is common to them is that the people wanting to ban them are usually bigots acting from a strange moral sense which they think they need to impose on the world. When somebody smokes marijuana, for instance, who is the victim?
Okay.
There is a consensual adult who is obtaining the drug and smoking it or drinking it in the case of bhang. The same holds for alcohol.
Okay.
And if that person wishes to spend his money doing something which cannot even be proved to be harmful to him and may in certain cases be beneficial to him,
Okay.
who exactly is the victim here? Even alcohol has, there are a lot of medical studies saying that a glass of wine every day helps with keeping heart disease under control. It helps with bad cholesterol. So who is the victim if somebody is drinking?
So basically, there are no
And
victims
similarly
to
with
any of
gambling,
these
it's my
actions.
money. I mean, if I want to buy a new shirt with it, that's fine. If I want to bet on a horse, why is there a difference?
So if alcohol was far more harmful to me, then would it merit some form of state intervention, some form of legal controls?
One point here is that if I'm a consenting adult and I'm involved in a transaction in a victimless crime, like, for example, consuming a substance which is harmful for me, so long as the state does not have to bear the costs of mitigation of that harm, I don't think the state should intervene. Now, the point here is that, my doctor may have told me you can't eat, let's say, ghee. And I happen to like eating ghee. And if I eat too much ghee, I might end up with medical costs. Now, if I am bearing the medical costs as opposed to government having to pick up the tab for my medical costs, I don't see why the government should intervene. Similarly with alcohol. Now, if you argue that somebody who is under the influence of alcohol driving a car can kill somebody, I agree with you. And there should be laws against allowing people to drive cars while under the influence of drugs which might affect their reflexes. But, and that includes, sleeping pills which might be prescribed or whatever it is.
Right.
The act itself, I don't think the state has a right to interfere unless the state is being forced to commit resources to mitigating something involved in that act. And, if it's my money, I'm spending it on doing something, let us say, and I'm perfectly happy with the outcomes.
Okay, Devanshu, then why is the state acting? Why is the state intervening? What political benefits do they get?
First, all over the world, people who end up being politicians are generally people with strong and frequently bigoted moral opinions, which they attempt to impose on the public at large. Also, it's superficially very, it's superficially a very nice platform that, see, I'm a good man, so I'm going to stop all these terrible crimes, not allow people to gamble, not allow people to abuse substances. And it makes a reasonable political platform for a brief while. Usually what happens is that somewhere along the line people realize that you can't really stop people committing a certain kind of act. There are death penalties against substance abuse in many countries. It just drives the price of those substances up. It doesn't stop them getting around. People gamble everywhere around the world. If there are laws, the law enforcement authorities make large sums under the table from it. And in the process, the state ends up losing revenues and spending money on trying to stop crimes which would essentially not be crimes if you didn't, if you didn't legislate against them.
So that comes with an obvious economic cost, right? Government intervention,
Yes.
Acting against victimless crimes when there is no need to. So what does that
Yes.
involve, essentially?
Okay, first, to take fairly obvious examples, gambling in most places, including India, you have a sort of limited access to it in the sense that certain gambles are considered legal and certain gambles are not. The gambles which are considered legal, the government usually takes a short-term capital gains tax off the table, which in India amounts to about 1/3 of the proceeds. Gambling, as you know, is a zero-sum game. So if there is, 100 rupees in play, the government takes 34.5% actually, regardless of who makes and who loses that money. The contracts which are banned, for example, cricket, for example, political betting, the government is not making this money. Somebody else is. With alcohol, India, the liquor market is about 1 to 1.5% of GDP. It's a state excise thing, and it remains state excise because GST, it is outside the purview of GST. States which have alcohol, which legally allow the sale of alcohol, tend to make around 20 to 25% of state excise revenues from alcohol. States which have prohibition obviously forgo that money, and they end up having higher bus fares, for example. They end up having higher rates for electricity and for other government services because they have to try and, in effect, raise that kind of revenue from somewhere else. Now, that imposes a tax on the non-drinker. If I'm assuming I was a complete teetotaler, I would be this happened in Haryana, for example, when Haryana was under prohibition. They tripled the bus fares. Now, for every teetotaler who happened to be traveling by bus, that's a huge imposition. You don't drink, you wouldn't drink anyway. And you're paying 3 times as much because your government refuses to allow other people to drink. And similarly with marijuana, we can take the case of the American states which have legalized it, or Mexico and Colombia, which have legalized it, or Holland, for example. And you see that there is a large revenue flow which is being foregone by regions that refuse to allow this to be consumed legally. Plus, there will be ancillary crimes because it is under the table, so you spend money bribing law enforcement, you spend money trying to create marketing channels which are not easily put together. So these are the associated and fairly obvious costs of legislating against victimless crimes.
So Devanshu, on one such victimless crime like alcohol consumption, there are a whole range of things that governments can do, right? There's one end which is extreme prohibition. You criminalize the sale, the consumption, various aspects of alcohol, and it's all illegal. And maybe on the other end, when it's all sort of free and open, people can do whatever they want, government doesn't come in. And what you were describing to us now, which is the government choosing to regulate it, control it, license it, and then tax it quite highly, but allow it to be legal, right? So where would you fall on the spectrum for India? Let's start with alcohol. What would be your preferred regulatory options over here?
The syntax, the Potemkin, what Potemkin, Catherine the Great's finance minister, figured out that people drink anyway. Mm-hmm. It's very low tech to set up a brewery and or a distillery. Anybody can do it. Literally anybody can do it. Mm-hmm. You just let them do it, and you set a fairly high tax on it. As with cigarettes, as with alcohol. Similarly, you treat marijuana the same way. And, you take that revenue.
And these are nice sources of government tax revenue, right?
These are significant, very significant sources of government revenue in any jurisdiction which allows, laissez-faire government. These are all very high sources of government revenue. Even in India, gambling is another very large source of government revenue. State lotteries raise a lot of money. Now, you would have to be an absolute idiot to buy a state lottery ticket because the odds are against you. But there are obviously a lot of absolute idiots in the world. All the states which have lotteries, and there's an interesting point to be made here that you used to have an illegal market called satta, a numbers game, which still exists sort of, but it's been marginalized completely by the state lotteries. Interestingly, the satta guys who do exist now, instead of actually generating their own random number or non-random number, they just say that, okay, we will take the Sikkim state lottery last 3 digits as our winning digits for the day, if you understand what I mean. So, and the only way they can exist now is by using very small ticket sizes, because you can buy a state lottery ticket for $10. Okay, so if you want to actually gamble on the state lottery for 5 rupees, you go to the illegal matka guy and gamble on it for 5 rupees. But if they reduce the ticket size of the state lotteries to 1 rupee, people would not even gamble. If you not gamble illegally. So you've driven the illegal gambler out of the game, and you have a system where you're making a lot of money.
So Devanshu, you're telling us that the demand for, say, alcohol or marijuana or gambling is inelastic, so it becomes a good source of government revenue. But what do we need to figure out first if we want to reform these sectors in an intelligent manner?
Yes, you have to do it in an intelligent manner. Obviously, like any other industry, when you're regulating an industry, you have to figure out what are the special needs of that industry, if you like, and you have to set up laws which are clean, transparent, which allow for easy operation, and at the same time don't allow for peculiar ways of gaming the system or abusing the system. It's not difficult. There are models from all around the world. I mean, you can use, for example, the Dutch or the Colorado model if you're going to legalize marijuana. You can use the Australian model or the Macau model if you're legalizing gambling. You have models from all around the world. And alcohol, we have our own, we have many states where alcohol is completely legal and fairly easily available. And you know how to manage that industry.
So reform is important. I mean, that seems apparent. But there are also, I think, other negative externalities associated with these areas, right? I mean, we hear so much about societal evils. But what are the other negative externalities?
By and large, and I'm saying this from a global perspective, I'll come back to this point. By and large, the data indicates that the social evils spoken of tend to be less intense and tend to be quantitatively less in regions where these things are legal. A case in point would be the fact that, in places in India where prohibition prevails and liquor is not legally available, people distill liquor in extremely unhygienic circumstances and usually with as any chemist will tell you, usually with a lot of methyl alcohol still left in the distillate, and as a result you regularly have people dying of consuming illicit liquor. That doesn't happen in states where liquor is legal. Similarly, the contracts are legal. There is very little match fixing in horse racing, for example. There is no match fixing in state lotteries. The match fixing globally in games like sports like soccer or cricket, the match fixing always happens from places where gambling on the sport is illegal. Singapore, for example, match fixing is the global match fixing center for soccer, and that's because gambling on soccer is illegal in Singapore. Similarly, in India and Pakistan, where gambling on cricket is illegal, India and Pakistan are the match fixing centers for cricket gambling. And it's not Australia, where you can gamble on these things legally. An Australian bookie runs a clean operation where customers walk in the door, give him their money, and all he has to do is manage the odds to ensure that he comes out at the end with a profit margin. That's much easier to do than actually catching a sportsman and paying him large sums of money to deliberately lose a game, or even to deliberately bowl a no ball.
So clearly, places which make victimless crimes illegal become dens of those activities, right? But what happens when there is a systemic social issue that people are not able to find good solutions of? Like, for example, I think alcoholism is perhaps a rampant problem across India, and perhaps responsible for a lot of other social evil. For better or worse, the public conversation stuck around, should I do prohibition in my state or not? Right? So Bihar went ahead and said yes. Tamil Nadu was a qualified yes, diluted down.
I don't think Tamil Nadu will.
We've had a lot of flirtations with prohibition and removal of prohibition and things. In fact, this gives you, in terms of if you're a data scientist or a social scientist of any degree, you actually have a fairly good experimental situation here.
Right.
Other variables have not changed in states which have imposed prohibition and then removed prohibition. So have your crimes, the crimes that prohibition of alcohol supposedly mitigates, have those crimes increased or decreased during periods of prohibition or not? Since the other social variables have not changed, you have unusually strong situation for looking at the data and saying that prohibition works or it doesn't work. And if you look at NCRB, National Crime Records Bureau data, insofar as anybody has done this, and I just started looking at this recently, I think you would say that prohibition actually makes things worse. It does not mitigate the social evils it's supposed to mitigate. And it adds on a lot of ancillary crime in that you end up with a completely corrupt police force and a whole bunch of people who are depending on this industry in an illicit fashion to make a living. It's almost as bad as it was in the 1970s and 80s when gold smuggling was banned, when gold was smuggled because gold imports were banned.
Right.
Everybody wanted gold.
So
you ended up with a whole bunch of criminals providing it.
So Devanshu, but coming back to the societal issue of rampant alcoholism. So we'll agree that prohibition has too huge a cost and doesn't work. But how do you solve something like rampant societal alcoholism?
And just one thing I want to add to that question. So a lot of women across states, I've noticed, are very pro-prohibition because they say, okay, then my alcoholic husband will not come and beat me up. There's a lot of physical abuse that's often just attributed to alcoholism.
Certainly, domestic violence, Amshini, is one of those things where unfortunately we don't have decent statistics, and I would believe you or any woman who said that, not only that this is a problem, that's obvious, but that prohibition seems to help in that at least my husband gets drunk less often. That's possibly true, but balance that off against the fact that once in a while the husband will end up dead because he's drinking illicit alcohol which has a lot of ethyl alcohol in it. Number one. And number two, if you have a well-run state like Gujarat, it is actually easier to get alcohol under prohibition than any other state.
Yeah, it has been said that Gujarat is probably the easiest state in the country where you can source alcohol, provided you know how to pull the right strings, of course.
Walk off a plane in Ahmedabad, tell your taxi driver that I have an out-of-state address and I need a liquor license, and the man would take you to a doctor, a medical practitioner who was licensed by the government, who would immediately give you a certificate. You could walk into a liquor shop controlled by state excise, produce that certificate, buy your alcohol, keep what you wanted, and sell the rest on the black market. All of this was smoothly done, and it continues to be smoothly done. Gujarat is the best place in the country to have a drink if you happen to have an out-of-state address. The point is that everybody along the line is making money from it. The state isn't. Everyone else is. Problem with alcoholism and the association with domestic violence is huge. It's global. If you look at Russia, or you look at Ireland, or you look at other places around the world, in Scandinavia, for example, there are huge issues connected to alcohol abuse combined to DV, domestic violence, which takes us into a different territory. If you're asking me how I would solve the problem of domestic violence and alcohol abuse, I haven't a clue. Or rather, I would say that, you'd have to look at models such as Alcoholics Anonymous, such as various other places where people may have worked out means by which society at least mitigates the problem. But that is rather different from putting in a ban which cannot actually be implemented. I mean, the sad thing is that people drink in Arab states where you could receive a death sentence for drinking. They still drink. Every year, people are executed in Iran and Saudi Arabia for drinking. Arguably, the prohibition does not work. Something else may work, but prohibition does not. Right. We have a problem here in that we don't have clean data on domestic violence, unfortunately, and there's a pile of victimed crimes which are not even considered crimes. For example, marital rape. And that takes us into a different territory, because unfortunately I can't even assert with a great degree of confidence that domestic violence, whether it goes up or it comes down under a regime of prohibition, because I don't know. I don't have the data.
The one thing that seems to be odd about India is that hard liquor, I think, is cheaper in India than beer, which I think is the reverse in most places across the world.
Yes, this is a historical issue. I think it goes back to the fact that sometime in the 1950s, and this is completely anecdotal because I've talked to people about it, but I'm not sure that this is true. Sometime in the 1950s, the government decided that it was very easy to brew beer and it was very easy to make wine, both of which are, they're non-distillation processes, so they're very easy to do. All you have to do is wait for stuff to turn back, essentially. So they put a very high rate of excise comparative to distillation on breweries and on vineyards, and licensing a wine selling or a beer brewing operation was extremely difficult. It used to take years and years and years. Comparatively speaking, it is apparently easier to get a license for a distillery. I believe that this is the case. I can't assert this from personal knowledge.
Devanshu, all this talk of beer is just making me thirsty on a hot summer's day. I think we should actually go get a pint right now.
Thanks, Devanshu. It was a pleasure having you here.
My pleasure. Come up and have a drink with me sometime.
Sure, Devanshu. To many people, it may seem counterintuitive to say, let's legalize gambling or betting or drugs. But if we do it intelligently and get huge sources of government revenue, why not? There is little data that victimless crimes are the source of all societal evils. So we need to stop using this narrative to justify these bans or prohibitions, because we're just becoming a den of them. But to do that, our standards of morality need to change, and tackling dubious morality may be the biggest challenge of them all.
All right, and that's our show. Don't miss Devanshu Datta's 3-part series on victimless crimes on Pragati. Visit thinkpragati.com and go to the opinion section to catch them all. You can find new episodes of the Pragati podcast every fortnight on the IVM podcast app or any other podcasting app that you prefer. And of course on thinkpragati.com.
एक्सक्यूज मी भैया, एक्सक्यूज मी।
बोलिए मैडम।
मेन्यू में क्या है?
मेन्यू में सीन अनसीन है, पॉडकास्ट है, ऑन कोर्स है, साइरस है, मेड इन इंडिया, रीडिस्कवरी प्रोजेक्ट, एम्पावरिंग सीरीज, सेक्स वैक्स है, IVM लाइक्स है, सिंप्लीफाइड है, कीपिंग इट क्वियर है, थिंग्स एंड डेस्टिनेशंस है, माय नेबर सकरबर्ग है और द फैन गराज है। आपको क्या चाहिए?
एक बार रिपीट कर देंगे क्या?
रिपीट नहीं करता हम। आप जाओ IVMpodcast.com पे और सुनो ये सब, या फिर डाउनलोड करो उनका ऐप, सब आपकी उंगलियों पे।